All right, get my timer set here. All right, so everything here looks extremely informal, and unfortunately, it had to be that way because I could not find anybody who wanted to come by and listen about the history of the emergency medical dispatch service. So came down to the ninth hour. Still couldn't get enough people here because with the attendance thing, it's all or nothing. So I just told the people who did say that they could come through and help me out. I just told them just go ahead and save yourself a little bit of traveling time, and I'll just go ahead and do what I can do. So I'm here at my home with my presentation ready to talk about the emergency medical dispatch. Now, in this lecture, you're going to hear me switch between emergency medical dispatch or EMD. And most time I'll use EMD, but just so you know, it means emergency medical dispatch. Being a firefighter, we like to shorten everything up. So here we go. So the name of my presentation is the emergency medical dispatch, a historic perspective. I'm Jonathan Bryant, and let's see here. There we go. I'm Jonathan Bryant, and like I said before, I've been with the Greensboro Fire Department for 6 years. I'm a certified EMT, and I'm a AHA CPR instructor. Now, with all those certifications, what that means is I have a very good working relationship with the EMDs, and I truly believe that they are unsung heroes because they act as very important cogs in the wheel when it comes to an emergency medical scene, but they don't get any of the glory. They are the shadows behind the scenes. So hopefully this presentation will give them some of the limelight that they deserve, and also it's just good information to know. So today we're going to talk about what the EMDs are and what they do. We're going to define what an EMD is, or what an emergency medical dispatcher is. We're going to go in depth with this, with their history, their development, their ups and downs, their bumps and bruises. And we're going to talk about what they do, because in all honesty, the history of the EMD service isn't that long, and it's not that much that you can go off of. So I figured that it'd be good to learn where they came from, learn what they do, and then discuss possibly where they're going in the future. We're going to talk about what they do, what their job requirements are, and we're even going to talk about some of the some of the, I can't say the word, sensibilization. We're going to talk about some of the ways that TV and movies really put the pizzazz in their job, and just talk about what the facts versus the fiction are when it comes to this job. And at the end, we're going to talk about possible future outlooks for this branch. All right, so I looked it up, and I had to tweak it a little bit because the definition of an EMD person or emergency medical dispatcher, it wasn't inclusive enough. So I wanted to add some more to it. So EMD can be defined as someone who responds to emergency and non-emergency calls for assistance and information, while providing dispatch and communication support services for police, fire, EMTs, and other related services. Now, that's a lot of words, but basically what that means is the EMD is somebody who is on the other line, is on the other side of that phone, and they're the ones who are going to talk to whomever is in trouble or needs help. Okay. While they do that, they're still an integral part in the whole thing, because they can actually do things from the phone, that can help the situation out, whether it be medical advice, or it could even be de-escalation of a situation. I've been on calls where the dispatcher was actually the one that calmed the person down enough to where they didn't pull the trigger, and when we got there, we were able to help further. So like I said, the definitions that were up there, they weren't as good as the ones that somebody who actually has had dealings with them and been involved with, and actually have had to rely on them for their own safety. Let's go back to the definition real quick, because I just thought about something. When we talk about they provide support services for police, fire, EMTs, and other related services, when I say other related services, I also mean things like field ops in most municipalities. There's a lot of times that a tree may fall, or a telephone pole may fall, or let's say a hydrant might break, or even just a water main break. For some reason, the first notion for most people is to call 911. So the dispatcher has to handle those type of calls as well, and they work with all different agencies to try to get things handled in the most expeditious way as possible. All right. So before the implementation of a professional dispatch service, people who needed help, generally directly called the ambulance service. So let's rewind the clock 40, 50 years. Let's go back to the 1960s, 1950s, and I'm approximating, so you got to excuse that. But there was not a unified or even a defined emergency medical dispatch service. People didn't have somebody that they could call with one phone number, because like in the United States, the phone number for all emergency help is going to be 911. Well, back in the day, they didn't have that, so they had to actually know who or who their emergency personnel were and where they were located, because they didn't have not GPS. I'm sorry, they didn't have smartphones and things like that where they could go ahead and just, hey Google, give me this phone number. They actually had to know these things. These things were written down on the refrigerators. So they would call the people directly, and hopefully they would get somebody. But there was a problem with that type of system, okay? Because let's say there were multiple calls that day. There's never enough ambulance services there's never enough of anybody normally, especially not in the city of Greensboro. So what happens is these people are out on calls and everything, and sometimes there will be nobody at the AMBO base to pick up the phone. So now you have somebody that needed help and they couldn't get help because there was nobody there to pick up the phone. And at the time, we didn't have the EMDs, and radio dispatching was extremely limited. It was like, basically, for lack of a better term, it was in test markets. So some problems that I saw with this were that someone had to be at the ambulance base at the time of the call. And like we just discussed, that wasn't always the case. Sometimes they were out on call. Sometimes they were just out and they might have been refueling their buses or whatever you want to call it. And when I say buses, I mean the ambulance rig. The fire service, we call our trucks rigs. That we call the ambulance service, we call those buses. So I'm not saying actual bus. But anyway, so another one was the manpower constantly fluctuated. So let's say, for instance, in the city of Greensboro, the hot days, and I say hot days, for us are going to be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. That's usually the club nights and the going out nights because we're a college town. So those would be the nights. If we were back in the late 40s, 50s, in that time when people were calling the ambulance services, there'd be a good chance that they may not have somebody at the depot or station, or whatever you want to call it, to pick up the phone because they were already out doing something. They were already out running calls. So the manpower fluctuated constantly. On a Monday, which is usually a typically slow day in Greensboro, there might be 4 or 5 EMTs sitting around the phone waiting for the call. But on a Friday, you might not see anybody back in the station for a couple of hours. So it was really dangerous to have to do stuff like that. When it comes to this, though, another issue was that all the appropriate agencies that may be needed for a call may not be notified. All right, so let's say we go ahead and we call ambulance base number 3, and we say that we need help. I need help. I've been stabbed. And that's all they say. Okay. Well, nowadays, if the EMDs hear that there was a stabbing, they're going to automatically dispatch GPD or 911, whatever your local thing is called. Ours is GPD. They're going to dispatch them along with the EMTs to see what's going on, because there still may be an assailant on the grounds. But back in the day, they were relying on whomever picked up that phone to have the forethought to call all the necessary agencies. And let's be honest, humans are fallible, so that wasn't going to happen, not every time. And depending on how much experience the person had that was on the other line, they may have not have known to hey, I got somebody up here that's been stabbed, so there might be a scene safety issue. And they may not have known that because they just haven't experienced it yet. So that was a major flaw. And also, the last one was there was no checks and balances against EMS abuse. Now, when I say EMS abuse, I don't mean, excuse me, I don't mean somebody off the EMS bus is hurting somebody else or they're stealing or anything like that. That's not the abuse I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the people who, because they live on the east side of town, they want to go to the west side of town, and on the west side of town happens to be where the hospital is, so they just call up EMS, say, hey, I got a cough, sniffle, They get a ride out to the hospital. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with you. They dispatch them. I mean, they release them real fast, and now they're on the other side. But see, basically, for all intents and purposes, they got a free taxi ride. That still happens quite often here, but I'm certain that it wasn't nowhere near as bad as it used to be. So without the EMD to screen those calls and prioritize those calls, people were just getting free rides wherever they could. Let's talk about the history a little bit more. The emergency medical dispatch system initially wasn't a planned entity. Most great discoveries happen on accident. Penicillin happened on accident. Gravity happened on accident. Of course, gravity was already there and around, but still they came to the realization of it on accident. Okay, so the EMD system is no exception to this. It was around 1975 in Phoenix, Arizona, when a paramedic named Bill Toon answered the phone and helped to start what would become the EMD system. Now let's talk about that. We just said a couple slides ago that there was a chance that there would be nobody in the office when you call, so it would just happen by chance that he was there for whatever reason. Let's look at the particulars of this one. The phone call was a mom with a non-responsive baby. So the baby, most time when it's babies, there is breathing issues, or a real bad sickness. So the baby was non-responsive, and Bill Toon gave an unscripted medical instruction to the mom that helped that child survive. Now, when we say unscripted, it's important to note that nowadays there are things called protocols, and protocols are basically a script that all first responders have to follow, step by step by step. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but one of them being it's a medical type thing because it follows a logical sequence of events for us to make sure that we cover all our bases, but also it has something to do with covering our legal liabilities. Okay, so this guy right here, he did something that was way thinking into the future here, and he said he gave her instructions over the phone on how to help that child. Now the child survived, and of course, as you can imagine, there was big publicity about this. Somebody over the phone helped save the baby's life. They beat the firefighters or the EMTs out there with their words, and that was a great thing. So now we're starting to get a little bit of light shown on something that up until that point really hadn't been done. So the fire chief of that area, Chief Alan Brunacini, he developed a program of pre-arrival instructions that were to be given from that point forward, and he coined the term medical self-help. Now, mind you, he just coined the phrase medical self-help to kind of give it some type of pizzazz and flair so that it can be out there in the public. But basically all he did was he just told them to do what Mr. Toon was doing. He told them, if you know what's going on and you know how to help these people, tell them what to do. Don't sit there and just not say anything. If you know that the person needs the Heimlich, then for God's sakes, tell people how to administer the Heimlich effectively, and we can start saving some lives. So that's basically what he did. So let's fast forward up to 1976 and 1977, respectfully. These were, in my opinion, pivotal moments in the EMD field. In 1976, a college thesis identified the issue of EMS abuse and offered that the EMDs, or emergency medical dispatchers, would help to prevent the waste in the resources. Now let's talk about that, because we know that in every municipality, budget is the end all be all. They don't want to go over budget. They want to show that they can use money, and they want to have extra money left over so they can do more things with it. Well, when you have all this EMS abuse, you are just flushing your budget down the drain. So when this young man came up and came out with this thesis, it was like a light bulb turned on. And because you can trace this back to a financial or monetary type motivation, you see why the EMDs were shown in a positive light. Because at the end of the day, they were just saying, hey, we can save some money here if we can put a rein on this. 1977, Dr. Jeff Clausen developed dispatching protocols known as the medical priority dispatching. Now, this can be boiled down into three main points, okay? Point number one, key questions. When that call comes through, there are certain questions that you need to ask in order to get to the seat of the fire, for lack of a better term, quicker. Because when you're on the phone, if it's a real emergency, those seconds really matter. So the first thing about the medical priority dispatching is going to be the key questions, and those always fall under the what we call protocols now. The next one is going to be pre-arrival instructions. Now, the pre-arrival instructions aren't for the first responders. They're more for the people who are there. Let's say that there was a CPR that needed to happen. Well, the pre-arrival instructions are going to be the step-by-step directions given to the person on the phone on how to administer effective CPR. Or let's say we have a child with a fever of 105. They may give the pre-arrival instructions of administering a Tylenol for fever reduction, or running a lukewarm bath to make basically a big heat sink, so that that heat can get out of that child's brain. But you get what I'm saying. So the last one is going to be response determinants. Now, here, in my opinion, is where EMDs, especially early EMDs, didn't get the credit that they deserve, because nowadays things are primarily computerized, and the computer does a lot of the response determinations for them. But back in the day, they had to know what to do. So let's say there was a fire call, and the EMD picked up the phone. They needed to know that, one, I need to dispatch the appropriate units. They can't just dispatch the whole city's department on one fire, or they can't dispatch a unit that's going to take 5 or 6 minutes to get there, when you got a unit that could take 2 minutes to get there. They needed to know where their resources were, but at the same time, they also needed to know, for situations, what other resources may be effective or may be necessary, because it's better to have it not needed than need it not have it. So these people, these front runners, they had to know this type of stuff. They had to stay on top of their craft, and they had to know and think quickly on what are my guys out in the field going to need? What is something that they may come up against? Now, like I said, nowadays, not to take anything away from the current EMDs that's out there, they have technology now that's based off of algorithms and previous data, at least in the city of Greensboro, that will send out the proper response depending on the time of day, the day of the week, and even the season. So it's based off of all that stuff, but all that stuff was developed by people who actually did the job. So let's go up to 1979. In 1979, the first formal training program was developed for the EMD profession. And in 1979, we have the first time the phrase emergency medical dispatcher, the title emergency medical dispatcher was bestowed upon some people. I wasn't able to find out who they were, but in 1979 was when we got the first official EMDs, emergency medical technicians. Now, just like anything else, there is going to be growing pains. There are going to be bumps and bruises, because nothing's perfect when you first try to do something. You have to learn through doing and through experience. Unfortunately, in the first responder field, and I'm including EMDs in the first responders because they're the first ones that people have contact with, these bumps and bruises can be to the detriment of either the responder or to the victim. So let's talk about a couple of those.